"Mommy, why is that man rubbing a paper?" "Don't mind him. Come on, let's go." But the boy continued looking at the Raggedy Man, drawn to the determined set of his eyes. "I said don't mind him. And for Christ's sake, don't stare." The boy continued watching him raptly, his attention broken only once to ask, "Why?" With a grimace of exasperation, the mother steamed by, grabbing the boy and pulling him in her wake as an afterthought. Even so, as he was pulled away, he couldn't help but glance at the man again, trying to see what he saw, to experience what he was experiencing. The topic wasn't broached again, until the boy and his mother had put the groceries in the back and were riding home in the station wagon. "Jeffrey, sometimes there are things best left alone." "Like that hobo?" he asked. She continued as if she hadn't heard. "Sometimes there are things you just shouldn't mess with." "Was that paper bad, Mommy?" The question seemed to baffle her, who pursed her lips and stared without seeing at the road ahead. "Well, not bad, really. I don't think. Look, hun, I know this probably won't make sense, but remember that time when you and your father went hiking, and he dared you to climb that big rock?" "Yeah." "And remember how you didn't want to, but he kinda forced you to with his words?" "Yeah." "And remember how you fell and broke your arm?" Oh yes, the boy remembered that all right. His mommy and daddy had shouted at each other for half the night after he got back from the hospital. Yes. Well, there you go. The paper's kind of like that. Oh. The rest of the ride home was taken in wary silence, but all along the way, the paper continued floating and bobbing on the surface of Jeffrey's mind like a rotten old apple in a pool of vomit. When he got home, he helped his mother unload the groceries. The 3 packs of beer were too heavy, so his mother unloaded them and put a few drops of grease on the rusty hinges of the door that led from the garage to the house. He had to use a step stool and stand on his tiptoes to reach the top one. Once inside, he dropped his load unceremoniously on the floor. His mother had judiciously made sure his bag contained the crackers and bags of noodles, not the eggs, and was just about to tromp upstairs when a picture next to the stairwell caught his eyes. It was one of the countless pictures of the old family he'd seen and walked past. Nothing special about it. Plain black frame, dingy yellow glass, grainy Polaroid faded yellow at the edges. In the picture, he, Mommy, and Daddy were at the beach. Daddy was being a goofball and Mommy was laughing. Jeffrey was just being himself with a big, cheesy picture smile on his face. Oh yeah, and in the corner, their old family pet that died a month ago. That golden, medium-sized Labrador that was put down a week after the picture was taken. He remembered that day clearly. For that day was the day when he first noticed the crack which ran through Cap's lower belly. He hadn't shed a tear, or even felt sad when he was told Cap had colon cancer, even as he ran his fingers through his fur for the last time. All he felt was a tight, unpleasant squeeze in his chest, as if some kind of circle had pinched together at last and squeezed his middle briefly. His mother had blubbered, of course, and his father made sure to take him out to the dog's grave and out to Chuck E. Cheese later. But no sorrow had gone through him then, nor did it show itself even briefly when he lay awake in bed that night. Just the unpleasant finality of a circle pinching shut on him. The memory suddenly faded with a bang as Mommy shoved the glass bottles of beer into the cupboard on top of Daddy's old lunchbox. Jeffrey's kindergarten lunch pail tumbled out and got tangled up in Daddy's. But Mommy slammed the cupboard shut regardless and began putting the eatables away. Jeffrey turned and glanced at the picture once more before starting upstairs, feeling those unnameable bands begin closing on his chest once more. From his angle, the crack that had spread from Cap's belly glimmered a silvery white, the same color as the paper that he'd seen in the hobo's hands, and which he now saw gripped just below the crack in Daddy's forearm. It was Mugsy Day. Jeffrey smelled the sour reek of beer. His mother's snores could be heard from down the hall. Mommy drank heavily last night, enough, he knew, to put her in a deep sleep that would last the whole day and night. There had been quite a few instances of this, enough that he'd added a word to describe such days into his 5-year-old vocabulary. Mugsy. He got out of his bed and marched crossly downstairs to eat his typical Mugsy breakfast. Dry cereal out of the box and some orange juice if the container was light enough to pour into his Scooby-Doo glass. As he ate, he went over the few things he could do for fun. His toy box was always an option, but they were no fun unless Mommy was there to play Transformers with him. Since the split, he'd tried playing them by himself, but soon gave up when his mother, in a drunken rage, called him a loony and a schizo from her spot on the living room floor downstairs. He'd tried to convince himself he wasn't a schizo. Transformers wasn't like that. It was just pretend. All pretend. The frosted flakes didn't taste GREAT anymore, and the orange juice stopped tasting orange. I could play Legos, he thought half-heartedly as he rinsed his cup. But he knew that he really didn't want to do that either. Sooner or later, whatever he built would be torn apart just to build something else, and so on forever. And the prospect seemed more tiring and depressing than even playing Schizoloony Transformers. And it wasn't as if he could just go to a friend's house either. He was never good at keeping friends, only good at making and losing them. After the split, he'd become a TV and video game addict, and his social life had been built from bits and pieces of the qualities he admired, until he wore it displayed like a beggar's cloak. The pretty colors attracted people for a while, but the complex web was a sham, and all but the most superficial of people had eventually seen through it. If only his life were truly that material, truly that real. He shut off the water and stared out the window longingly. It's real out there, he thought glumly, but in here it feels fake. I don't want to be fake. I don't want to be a schizo or a loony. I don't want to play Legos forever. I want to be real. I want to be real. Jeffrey marched along the sidewalk, oddly solemn in the early morning Californian sunshine. On a whim, he walked behind the 7-Eleven and down a ramp which led past the dumpsters of the sushi place and ended in a do-it-yourself car wash. The place was an odd hybrid of urban and rustic. There was pavement, but odd little plants grew in cracks which zigzagged down the middle. Trees and undergrowth chased each other in verdant swaths along the edges, but, as a rule, on the edges they stayed. The place stunk of rotting sea mammals, but the stench was rendered almost pleasant once it filtered through the whispering leaves around him. But the thing that really did it for Jeffrey was the staircase located on the edge of the ramp, the one which led to the sushi place's parking lot. For that, he knew, was the place. The staircase itself was utterly swallowed by plant life, perhaps even partly digested. Most would have walked right past it, thinking that a careless bricklayer took his lunch there during the time of the dinosaurs. But Jeffrey knew it was a staircase, and he also knew one other thing that only he could know. It was the place. The paper lay at the edge of the top step. Lucky 7 Lottery, it read. Scratch one of the pots below and see if you get the lucky number. None of the pots had been scratched. He lowered his finger and had begun to worry at the edge of one of them when he stopped. Something clicked deep inside his brain. The edge. Dare he cross it? He looked down at his nail in mild surprise. It had started scratching again. Will I get it? He thought with some excitement. Will I get the lucky number? At the number which appeared beneath his finger. That band, that horrible cold finality, tightened over his chest until he could barely breathe. Before he could do anything, before he could catch himself, his legs wobbled and he tripped against the railing to the stairs. It broke with an ominous snap. The he was falling, tumbling down over the edge. "Whoa there, buddy! Are you okay?" Jeffrey opened his eyes and saw the concerned face of a trucker staring down at him. "Yeah. What are you doing so far away from home, buddy?" Jeffrey stared down at his footies. The trucker sighed and scratched his stubbly chin. "Well, I guess it doesn't matter how you got here or how you fell, just how to get you back home. Where you live?" A warning bell went off in Jeffrey's mind. He'd been told never to tell a stranger where he lived. "Just put me near In and Out," he said in a voice so wary and solemn it made the trucker laugh. "Okay, buddy, okay. It doesn't matter how you get here or how you fall, just how you get yourself back home." The words bobbed up and down in his mind like an apple floating about in a pool of vomit as he sat on the couch staring at the dark face of the flat-screen TV. The remote lay in his hands and he was flipping aimlessly through the channels. Tom and Jerry, opera, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. "I want to be real," he protested feebly. Flip. Channel 49, 52, 76. Real stories, real people, real news. A BC with Diane Sawyer. Real. This just in, divorced man Jonathan Dunnels has been found dead on the side of Daily Drive with what appears to be shallow wounds lining his inside arm. Police records say the cuts appeared to be done earlier this morning, and that the obvious lack of evidence of any struggle has led them to believe that the wounds were self-inflicted. Reporter Dave Stevenson at the scene. "Thank you, Diane. I'm here at a puzzling crime scene with the Ventura County Sheriff. Sheriff, what are your thoughts on this?" "Well, you've summed up my thoughts pretty good," the man said as he slapped his growing potbelly and yanked his pants up. "But what I don't understand is where he got the weapon for the crime." "I got it," Jeffrey mentally screamed at the screen. "I got it, you stupid dumbhead." Or the motive, and that's all I got to say on it. Only that I suspect no foul play whatsoever. The fat man slapped his economy-sized buttocks this time, then yanked his pants up again and turned to talk to a deputy with a major acne problem. "Back to you, Diane." "Thank you, Dave. In other news." Click. Jeffrey stared at the remote and then at the screen. "I got the motive too, you stupid dumbheads," he thought bitterly. "You schizo-loonies." He looked outside at the dark sky and then at his own belly. He tried slapping it, then turned around and slapped his own buttocks. He giggled. "Stupid dumbheads." Jeffrey's stomach growled, but he knew he wasn't hungry. The bands surrounding his lower belly and now his arms prevented that from happening. So he got off the couch and toddled over to the stairs, the extra weight of those bands making him feel 5 going on 16. For a split second, he felt an indescribable urge to look at that photo next to the stairwell. But he soon got over it and began stumping up the stairs to his room. He didn't need to look at the picture to know that the lottery ticket he'd seen in Daddy's hand earlier was gone. That night, before he went to bed, he took the lottery ticket out and stared at it, thinking, "You know, one of your brothers killed Daddy," he whispered. "But Daddy liked you, I guess, so I'm gonna keep you a while. Until it kills me." A devious little voice finished in Jeffrey's head. "Until it kills me." With that whispered ultimatum, that boy tucked the lottery ticket under his mattress, turned off the lamp on the nightstand next to his bed, and promptly went to sleep. The days and years pass at the same rate as always, but for Jeffrey Dunnels, it seems he flashes by the world on a conveyor belt from hell. Through the years, he all but forgets about the ticket and the strange phenomena surrounding it. Eventually, even the death hold those strange invisible bands had on him loosen as he grows accustomed to that strange dark presence that had seemed to settle in since early childhood. In the memory's place crowd new ones, knowledge and experience, some of it useful, most of it not, and all of it clamoring for attention. Hobbies and extracurricular activities occupy most of the boy's free time, and his mother cleans up her act for the time being, if only to keep a better eye on her son, now a teenager. But promises are always kept, some way or another, and one day the ticket was found. Jeffrey stared at his pudgy little arms and legs, then looked around. "Why am I 5 again?" he asked himself as he took in the sight of how Vaughn's looked a decade ago. "You stupid dumbhead." He heard a voice scold him in a creepy, childlike imitation of rage. "That's 'cause you're in a dream." "Jeffrey," he heard a drunkard slur. He turned around and wasn't quite surprised to see it was his mom. "Jeffrey, it's time to go," she crooned at him, weaving back and forth like a Looney Tunes version of a hobo. He just stared at her hand, which held a bottle labeled Texas Driver. "Where?" he asked as if, drumroll, in a dream. Clash. "Jeffrey, it's time to go to the place." A smart-ass comment began to rise into his mouth, something like, "Oh, the place. Yeah, you mean with that one guy that one time, you know, with the dude with the hair? Sure, sounds absolutely bitchin'." But the comment died before he even gave it thought as the homeless guy he'd seen near the lottery machine turned around and shed his skin like Dr. Lizard off of The Amazing Spider-Man. Jeffrey wasn't quite surprised that it was his dad. "Jeff, old boy, don't listen to that drunk old hag over there. Listen to me. I hate that drink, by the way. In fact, I hate alcohol in general. A nastier habit there never was. That's a big reason why I left you, you know. But listen to me, Jeffers. But Mom told me you left because you loved to gamble too much," Jeffrey said. "In fact, you're standing in front of a lottery machine you just bought a ticket from, Dad, old boy," he thought viciously. Sure, a lady can be a bit irrational when upset, especially when drinking rotten juice mixed with beer and God knows what else. But her bottle ain't the ticket, Jeff. Old boy, this is. And then he held up the lottery ticket, its unscratched version. "And now it's time to see whether we got the lucky number and won the prize. I always liked prizes. Don't you?" "No, I fucking hate them." But Mr. Dunnels' mildly insane voice cut through the shout like a knife through fat. "Now let's see. Gotta scrape the gunk off nice and proper now. Don't have a quarter to scrape the shit off. Spent 'em on this thing. I didn't want this. I wanted to be real. I wanted you to be real. I still want to be real. I gotta find the thing with my fingernail. Gotta find the edge and peel this thing off with my fingernails. I hung by my fingernails. Did you know that, you little shit? I hung 'cause your mother pushed me there and you just stood there with your stupid little footies and picked it up and pushed me off. No. Do you feel lucky? His father's fingernails broke off a little bit each time he chipped at that scratch and peek pot of gold, and blood began splattering the surface of the lottery ticket until it looked like red glass. Do you feel fucking lucky? And his father's insane laugh rang out. The lottery ticket was gone, and in its place was a picture frame. The picture frame. Today's our lucky day, Mr. Dunnels crowed as he stood up and held the picture like it was some kind of trophy. His laughter was becoming more maniacal by the second, and Geoffrey willed himself to come awake, for he knew in the way the bands tightened around his wrists and lower belly what was going to happen next. Geoffrey stood up and stepped toward his father. Ring a fucking ding! We have our winner! And as he said it, the laugh turned into a gurgle as a shattering sound came from his hand. Geoffrey stared at his father and watched as a huge crack spread from the picture frame to a dog he saw in the corner of the store. But not just any dog, he thought in growing horror. Capitulo. The crack wasn't done yet. In a seemingly impossible move, it doubled back across time and space and split along Mr. Dunnels's left arm. Then a third steel band tightened around his throat as the crack turned around with single-track malevolence. No, a firm voice mumbled. The crack, thrown off by this distraction, hesitated, and in the milliseconds before it struck, Mrs. Dunnels stepped in front of it. "Mom!" Geoffrey cried out. "Don't!" Hot slime and alcohol that had soured in her stomach splashed all over Geoffrey as her belly split open. Geoffrey staggered as a third band tightened around his solar plexus, and this stagger made the crack miss him by inches. He didn't know this, though. All he knew was that he couldn't breathe. And then he was falling, tumbling through the air, screaming with what little air he had left. I want to be real. And then silence, for he'd fallen off the edge. Strangely enough, the dream didn't end there. Geoffrey woke up to find himself surrounded by police officers. They soon stepped away, though, leaving only the sheriff and deputy, who happened to be the trucker and the homeless guy he'd seen in the store when he was 5. "So, what are your thoughts on this, Sheriff?" the deputy asked. "Just to let you know, I know the motive and where he got the weapon, just not what that weapon could be." "The weapon? Don't you mean this?" The deputy held up his lottery ticket. "No, silly, that's the suspect." "So, do you think it was self-inflicted?" "What I've said is all I've got to say on it, except that I suspect no suicide whatsoever." "What do you want to do with the victim, boss?" The sheriff laughed a bone-chilling laugh. "What we always do with him. You schizo-loony build him up again." "But I don't want to play Legos." Geoffrey howled mentally. "That's the catch, innit? Nobody ever wants to be built back up, but they are anyway. And so will you." The sheriff's hands reached closer and closer. Geoffrey woke up gasping and holding his throat, willing the horrid images to go away. "Easy, bud," he told himself, in and out, one breath at a time. When he felt he had composed himself, he mentally went over the few scattered images left over from his nightmare. A broken picture frame, lottery tickets, bums, truck drivers. What was so scary about that? Jeffrey let out a snort, then bent over double as his back twinged. He glared at his lumpy old mattress. "Damn thing's gonna be the death of me," he muttered. The mattress had been his ever since he was 2, when his parents had bought the thing at a yard sale. The mattress had been in great condition, pristine save for the dust that covered it and the odd spring or two that had been missing. But the years had laid heavily on it, and the middle had bowed inward as springs rusted and stuffing decompressed. Now it was hardly more than lumpy bunches of patchy softness and springs jumbled together in a vaguely bed-shaped pile. He got up and went into the bathroom, holding his bladder shut a little longer to examine his face for any true hair. Nothing but fuzz. A second later, he let it loose and his thoughts turned to the bed again. He desperately needed to be awake and aware for tomorrow. He had semester finals, and he always did badly on tests anyway because of nerves. A lack of sleep wouldn't make it any better. But back to the problem of the bed. How would he? He glimpsed the dismantled skateboard deck in the corner of his closet and smiled. That would prop the bed up. He grabbed the board and began to lift the mattress, then stopped. A huge rush of déjà vu rushed over him. When had he put something under the mattress before? Telling himself he was stupid dumbhead, silly, that he was being schizo-loony. Paranoid to think he left anything of worth under there, he reached in and felt around for whatever it was, and then pulled out. Nothing. He sighed and reached down to pick up the deck, and that was when he saw it. "It must have fallen out when I was groping around in there," he told himself as he stared at the paper on the floor next to him. "Of course. I just happened to suddenly lose feeling in my hand when I swept the thing onto the floor. That's it." But despite his attempts to minimize the evil of the thing, to make it seem like nothing more than a lottery ticket, the ominous memories of the events surrounding the ticket flashed into his mind. He knew, deep down, that it was much more than a ticket. It was a curse everyone had been affected by in their own way. His dad was the most obvious and literal example of this, but his mother had felt, or rather drank, the effects of the curse as well. As if the ticket pained him, Jeffrey tucked the ticket back in and got in bed, not even caring that the mattress was more uncomfortable than ever. He'd told himself that he'd find a solution regarding the ticket by morning. He'd sleep on it, haha. But at 5:30, all he could think about was scantrons, bubbles, and Dixon Orioles. With the test-taking strategies he learned buzzing about in his head, he didn't even stop once to think about the lottery ticket he left under the mattress. His head still muzzy from sleep, he got up and slowly began to get dressed. He casually looked over at the clock on his nightstand, froze for a second, then winced as his mother's voice shrilled out. "Hurry up in there. You're gonna be late. And if you are, you're gonna have to walk." "All right, Mom. Sheesh," he mumbled through sleep-numbed lips. Even so, he began to go a bit faster. As he trudged around the room getting his books and papers into his backpack, he began to tick off the things he still had to do. Backpack, check. Books, check. Pencils, check. Paper, check. What am I missing? He looked in the mirror as he thought, and then slapped his forehead. Pants! He quickly slipped them on and zipped the fly, then looked around the room one last time, just to check to make sure he didn't forget anything. He scoured his brain even as he scoured the room, his eyes peering into every nook and cranny, then stopped on his bed. A vague memory stirred for a second in the deepest recesses of his mind. A memory he knew was important, but couldn't quite place. Shit, I forgot to make my bed. With a loud roar, the old station wagon's motor started. Jeffrey quickly grabbed a few corners of his sheets and folded them under the mattress, knowing that the mattress was to be replaced later that day. What he didn't know was that if he'd gone a little further, things might have looked up a little for him. But he didn't, and he completely ignored his better instincts and rushed downstairs into the garage where his mom was waiting with a scowl on her face. The finals went better than Jeffrey expected. The cute girl he'd be surreptitiously admiring the entire year had smiled at him. He'd even managed to make a new acquaintance. Someone who, if he couldn't call a friend, at least he could call him something other than bad names. All in all, his day at school was quite productive. That is, until he got the call. "Jeffrey, I'm going to be working some extra hours today." A frown appeared on his face, and he shook his head. Her voice was slurred. She had gone back to drinking, and would be out possibly all night. "Mom, is something wrong? You sound drunk." "We'll have to talk about it when I get back." "Did I do something wrong?" Silence on the other end. "Mom? Let's just say you tested your luck too far today, buddy." A click as she hung up. "Fucking great," he muttered as he combed his hair back with his hands. The rest of the day seemed to roll by unbearably slow, despite the fact that there were only 2 more periods left in the day. Every minute seemed like an hour as he wondered why his mom resorted to drinking her problems away again. As he sat in 5th and 6th period, he thought over her words. "You tested your luck too far today, buddy." Luck. Then it clicked, and he groaned as he realized his mistake. "I left the lottery ticket under the bed, and today was the day she was going to get the new mattress for me. Why didn't I think of that earlier?" Then, as if on cue, the bell rang. It was time. The day felt like a dream as Jeffrey stepped out of the bus. Just sunny enough to warm you up, but windy enough to make you realize summer didn't last forever. Bugs hummed their dreary tune in the scraggly grass of the park he got dropped off at. Birds screamed musically at each other. All in all, he couldn't help but feel it was a terrible day for a final confrontation. Because, he reasoned, that was what it was. A deep gut instinct told him that only one of them, Ticket or him, or was it Mother and him, would come out of it alive. Time seemed to slow as he trudged to his house, dread filling his every step. He already had a good idea of what he would find inside, and he knew it wasn't going to be pretty. If his mother already sounded soused on the phone, and she continued drinking, he couldn't even imagine how she'd be once he got home 2 hours later. He jaywalked the street leading to his neighborhood, stucco houses looming above like some kind of tribal death watch. He stopped and considered the simile. Death watch. Deeming it appropriate, he continued on into the network of cul-de-sacs with renewed dread. The first thing Jeffrey noticed when he walked inside was the sheer amount of bottles littering the ground. "Texas driver," he read. "I hate alcohol. A nastier habit there never was." The second thing he noticed was the stench. Can't really blame her drinking rotting fruit and God knows what else. The third thing he noticed was the utter desolation left all over the house. She only did that because she gets moody when she drinks. Can't really blame her. And the fourth thing he noticed was that the lottery ticket was downstairs, right below the picture frame, the cracked old picture of a cracked old life that no longer existed. "But that's not the ticket, Jeff, old boy, this is." Slowly, hatefully, He approached the ticket and the picture. A terrible smile creased his features. Time to cash you in. Oh yes, time to cash you in, you little bastard. Time to get rid of you once and for all. He laughed, long and hard, not even caring that his voice carried off the walls and echoed back. Not caring if it was mildly insane. Not even caring that, for a brief moment, his father and his detestable greed had shone through. He ended the laugh as abruptly as it started and grinned at the picture. Go ahead and try it. Go on, I dare you. Kinda hard to do anything when your buddy here. And here he waved the ticket. Is getting sold. Oh yes, me and Mom are going to live quite the life after this. One without pictures or tickets or stupid bottles. Try and stop us, I dare you. He laughed again, this time shorter, as he swept his hand across the wall and knocked the picture frame to the ground. He stared at it, expecting for something to happen, and laughed when all that happened was that a teensy spider web of a crack appeared near, but not on, his neck. That's what I thought, he muttered under his breath as he stomped out the door and slammed the door behind him. The house was quiet after he left, but it was a different kind of quiet. The atmosphere felt electric, alive. The air felt heavy, ready to crush the universe with potentially fulfilled expectations. The climax was coming, nearing, then arrived. The picture frame tinkled, and the crack near a certain little boy's neck grew till it almost touched, almost but not quite. The questing crack knew its limits. Its time would come, just not yet. Not yet. But it would come. Sooner than expected. The night air moved sluggishly as Jeffrey's legs churned through and propelled him out of his neighborhood. Street lights glimmered off the heat waves emanating from the asphalt like lights illuminating a swimming pool. A cool breeze carried the dark seduction of the coming night, and of all its happenings and occupants. The night felt alive, vibrant, real. This was not lost on Jeffrey, who slowly calmed and slowed both his mind and legs as he snuffed the breeze. He smiled gently as he pondered what he would do with the riches once he got them. The first thing he'd do was move out of that damned house, with or without his mother. He'd provide for her, send her money and all, but he'd get out of that house if it was the last thing he did. Jeffrey nodded quietly to himself, then chuckled as the prospect of finally getting rid of the damned lottery ticket hit him. The thing that caused him and his family so much undeserved pain, so much misery. Gone. The thought nearly made him break out into that half-deranged laughter again. He quickly got his thoughts under control and quickened his pace. He never knew when his mother could stumble back home and find him missing. Up ahead, the bright lights of the 7-Eleven and the car wash shone like a beacon, encouraging him onward. Ding! Went the Salvation Army man's little bell as he strode into the store. The cashier forced a smile onto his face and dropped his copy of last month's Reader's Digest and, "Is there anything I can help you with, sir?" Looked hesitantly at the grinning teenager in front of him. Something seemed unnatural about the way. "Yes, could I use your phone?" The smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Sure, just don't take more than a minute, or I'll charge you." His smile grew larger, and definitely more creepy as, "Ring." He dialed the number from the ticket he held, and, "Ring," waited for the line to pick up. "We are sorry. The number you have dialed has been disconnected, or is no longer in use. Please dial a different." Then a loud slam. The smile that had stretched Jeffrey's face into a parody now was gone, but the cashier was not any more reassured. for a look of such haunting sorrow and rage creased his features that he wouldn't put it past the guy to pull a gun out and shoot everyone in the immediate vicinity. "Hey, bud, you all right?" It didn't work. Why the hell didn't it work? What did I do, God? Jeffrey stated in a flat, emotionless voice. The speaker, a tubby police officer with brown curly locks and green eyes, frowned as he took in the sight of the lottery ticker. "Lucky 7, eh? Don't you know that the company went broke years ago? Got sued for ripping people off and not giving them their prize money?" Jeffrey turned to look at the man, a broken, pleading look in his eyes that immediately struck the man to the soul and caused him to momentarily forget that Jeffrey was a minor and shouldn't be cashing in a lottery ticket. "Aw, geez, kid. What's got you down? You couldn't know. You'd never know what this ticket has done to me," Jeffrey suddenly shouted. He snatched up the ticket and stumbled towards the door, ignoring the grasping hands of a police officer who suddenly realized he was a police officer and a cashier who demanded him to pay for the phone call. As if they had minds of their own, his feet led him past the 7-Eleven and towards the ramp leading to the car wash. He bent over, tears and gasps commingling in the fishy stench. He looked up and saw that the undergrowth had been cut down, saw that every hiding place he could have stored the ticket had been gotten rid of. He sat at the top of the stairs, looking over the edge, as his tears splashed and sizzled on the hot pavement. "Excuse me, young man, but is that ticket from the Lucky 7 lottery?" Jeffrey looked up, startled at the inquisitive face fringed by black hair. He just nodded numbly and stared at the ground again. How to phrase this? "Young man, how would you like to be rich?" Jeffrey continued staring at the ground. He already tried. He already failed. So why let his hopes be raised? "It appears you do not understand what I allude to. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Bart Helgen, and I am what one might call a hoarder, a collector of rare artifacts. And you, sir, have one sitting in your hand. Nobody else I know has actually kept the tickets. That is, nobody except you." Jeffrey looked up, trying unsuccessfully to ward off the pointless hope blooming in his chest. The stranger, seeing this, smiled and nodded, then continued. "I see you finally catch my meaning. I shall be willing to offer a substantial sum of money for that exquisite artifact you possess, one which I hope you will agree upon. You appear to be fairly matured, perhaps 16, 17, 18, Jeffrey grimaced, but not at the stranger. Something didn't feel right. Something tingled, very lightly, at the back of his mind. "You most likely have a checking account, do you not?" Jeffrey rubbed the bridge of his nose and his frown deepened. A small, familiar, tightening sensation had begun to throb in his upper abdomen. "All right? Right?" The stranger's words faded in and out of his mind as the tight pain in Jeffrey's chest deepened into that hateful band he thought he rid himself of. That pain he hoped had been left behind as a vestige of childhood. The pain which had sprung up not in the darkest of nights but in the brightest of days. The pain that had been like a spreading crack, a worsening flaw in his happiness. A pain he only felt when something dear to him was to be stripped away. "Excuse me, sir. I have to go." Pain bloomed in his stomach, and Jeffrey resisted the urge to throw up. He stood up, swaying slightly, and stumbled away as fast as he could. "But young man, the ticket." Jeffrey turned around, and the stranger staggered back a little. A half-mad glint shone in the boy's eyes, as half his face curved in a sardonic smile. "Sir, At this point, I could care less about money. Keep the damn ticket. If you really want to be generous, give that money to a charity, or even a whorehouse for all I care. Goosebumps appeared all along the man's arms as a laugh that belonged in a loony bin escaped the boy's lips, and watched as he trudged up the incline and across the crosswalk, apparently oblivious to the fact that the light still showed a red hand. Only when he'd gone over the bridge and was hidden from view did the man turn around, pick up the ticket, and slowly, thoughtfully, walk back to his sedan. Jeffrey stumbled along the sidewalk, pulled towards his house by the same force that squeezed his middle. His mind raced and surged, trying to figure out who would die this time. Cap. His dad. Mom. He remembered how plastered she sounded on the phone earlier that day when he was at school, and imagined her drinking more, drinking bottle after bottle after bottle. Stop it. Just stop thinking that. Oh, but you know it's true. You know she'd do something like that. Just drink herself into her grave. The old sop. You know she would. And you're afraid. You're afraid you're... No. Stop thinking. Just stop. He stopped an inch away from slamming into the side of his house, surprised that he arrived that fast, then darted around to the front and turned the knob. Or attempted to. The door was locked. It wasn't locked when I left, he thought. Panic grew into a monster lodged into his chest as he uselessly jiggled the knob and pounded on the door. Mom, Mom, are you in there? Are you okay? Silence. Then the growing growl of a car engine as one stopped a few feet away from the front porch. A car door slamming. Son, is your mother here to talk to? Jeffrey turned around and winced internally as the same police officer he saw inside the 7-Eleven looked sternly at him, his soft, pudgy hand on his soft, pudgy hip. Not sure. I can't open the door. I forgot my key. She locked you out? The police officer's eyebrows raised and his mouth tightened. Not a good sign. It seems we'll have a lot more to talk about than I thought. Here, allow me. The police officer squared his body, obviously prepared to ram the door down, when his walkie-talkie squawked urgently. He relaxed slightly, then grimaced as something that sounded like gunshots cut through the static. He looked at his walkie-talkie, then at the house, and sighed. Son, you and your mother have a lot of explaining to do, but I've got to do something first. Wait here, outside the house, you hear? I'll be back. Jeffrey watched the officer as he left, then glanced around the porch. Finding the correct potted plant, he quickly shoved the pot aside and stooped to pick up the key. He turned to face the door again, and his heartbeat accelerated even more, pounding in his chest like a tribal drumbeat. Gripping the key tightly in his shaking hand, he brought it closer and closer to the keyhole. All at once, everything was still, numb. His heart calmed, his breathing slowed, his sweat finished dripping. The world held its breath. The house was empty as a tomb. The bottles he saw all over the floor earlier were gone. The fetid stank of stale wine had dissipated like a dream. The floor, where earlier there had bead wine stains and God knows what else, was spotlessly clean, no stains, nothing to indicate any proof that his mother had been in the house. Furniture was gone. Pictures were gone. Every one of his possessions were gone. Chips, stains, anything impure had been wiped from existence. As if to enunciate the change further still, the walls were now a pure, hospital-esque white. The silence was deafening. But worst of all, he was alone. And judging from what he saw, He always would be. No, he muttered. He dragged himself towards the stairs. His mother had to have been here, had to have been in the house. He had to have lived in this house. Was his entire past, like his social life, just a fabrication? A moan, almost too low to be perceived, reached his ears with the barest whisper of hope and horror. Mom? He quickly stomped up the stairs, his heart beginning to jumpstart into that now familiar frantic pace. Mom! He sprinted up the rest of the stairs, then stopped mid-stride as a frantic gurgle reached his ears. Then nothing. He fought against his growing revulsion and managed to force himself a couple of steps forward. His hand reached, trembling once again, towards the knob. The door opened at his touch, without him even turning it. He stared at the scene before him with no expression, shock numbing his emotions as he took it all in. He approached the prostrate form of his mother and gently wiped the string of regurgitated alcohol from her lips before kissing her forehead and shutting her eyelids. He sat down opposite her, regarding her with his head tilted, and stayed like this for half a minute before he realized she was truly dead. When that realization hit him, his gaze slowly drifted from her prostrate form and the mountain of bottles she lay on to an innocent-looking picture that lay to the side. Cap was playing with his tongue, lolling out. His dad was being a goofball. His mom was laughing, and Jeffrey was just being himself, with a big, cheesy picture smile on his face. And there lay his mother, dead from the crack which ran through her belly. After some time, he pulled his legs up to his chest. A hysteric chuckle escaped his mouth, which only deepened when he felt a band tighten around his belly. He rocked back and forth like this, laughing with the tears running down his face. It got her. I knew it would. Now it's going to get me. Go ahead, you bastard. Come and get me. Hell, I'm ready. Come and get me, and make it stop. Just make it stop. He didn't stop crying, even when he vaguely felt large, strong arms encircle him and lift him to his feet, and an authoritative voice ask him what happened. He just laughed and cried and rocked back and forth, lost in the shattered remnants of his mind. After all, dead men tell no tales. My father never told me anything, and look, he's dead. Ha 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 ha. God, please just end it now. Please end it now. End it now. If Jeffrey were in any state worthy of conversation at the time, he would undoubtedly be shocked at the surprisingly brief mention his tragedy was given in the news that night. This is ABC 7 Eyewitness News with Diane Sawyer. Welcome back, folks. It is a somber day for a kid named Jeffrey Dunnels, child of Melinda and Richard Dunnels, who has just lost his mother on the anniversary of his parents' divorce. She died of alcohol poisoning last night, at the age of 42. Authorities say he currently is being treated in a group home designed for children with mental problems, and that once he is declared rehabilitated, he will be sent to a good foster home. A month later, however, a story in the newspaper about the incident went much more in depth and featured a transcribed interview with the house director of the group home, Leonard MacDonald. Reporter: So, what was your first impression when Jeffrey was carried in? Director: Shock, horror, pity, the whole nine. I was actually amazed that his sanity was at a relatively stable level, given the horrors he must have gone through. Reporter: What did you do or say to him at first? Director: I said, "Hi, my name is Lenny. I'm the house director." I didn't really expect a response. Reporter: Did he respond? And if he did, what did he say? Director. He looked at me and said something that still gives me chills, and I have heard a lot of disturbing things among mentally ill children. Reporter. And what would that be? Director. It knows. That's all he said. It knows. If you could only see the look of pure terror in his eyes when he said that. Reporter. What did you say to him afterwards? Director. Nothing. I said nothing. Jeffrey had lost consciousness after he said that. Reporter. Were there any more episodes like this? Director. Yes. They were different in nature, but had presumably the same cause. He had blamed the unfortunate death of his immediate family on some being, and then become afraid that this being was after him as well, and knew where he was, and would eventually kill him as well. Reporter. Can you give me an example of such an episode? Director. Well, really, only a few stand out now that I think of it. Most of his episodes happened at night, in the form of night terrors, all of them involving thrashing, crying, and eventually waking up screaming odd things like "the place" and "that's the ticket." Reporter. So how did you treat him? From what I gather, government aid is getting slimmer and slimmer. Director. We received a tremendous donation of millions of dollars from an unknown donor. However, there being only one truly rich person in town, and the donor happening to be only one person, I'm pretty sure we both know who it is. Anyway, I never had much experience dealing with such intense mental illness as what Jeffrey had. I was able to hire a top-notch psychiatrist to personally handle things. Reporter. According to records, it states he left the group home a month later, declared rehabilitated. Director. Yes. And I think the reason is because he was told that when he left, he'd be moving somewhere far away. The idea of that, the appeal of him leaving the city where all the strife happened, I think, is what finally pulled him back to sanity. Reporter. Is there anything else of interest that happened before he left? Director. Well, there's something that happened right after he left. He had just driven out of the driveway, in fact, when I heard a strange noise in the kitchen. When I went to investigate, I don't know what it was, but it felt wrong, somehow, like tense, as if a large axe was suspended above my head. Reporter. Is that all? Director. Well, there's more. The first thing I looked at was the knife drawer, naturally, since it's the only dangerous thing in the kitchen, really. And when I looked in there, well, you wouldn't believe this. Reporter. Try me. Director. The butcher knife, the biggest, sharpest knife in the drawer, was gone. In the Camarillo Police Department, security cameras captured a conversation between two officers walking to the break room. Man, I think there's something to this case, more than meets the eye. What are you talking about? The chick drank herself to death. The husband checked out of life. The house director painted his brains on his wall, and the kid is traumatized. Seems straightforward to me. Aw, come on. Look me in the eyes and tell me you didn't have a nightmare last night. Well, maybe I did. Who cares? All I want is some coffee and... What about the fact that the picture the kid mentioned, the one supposedly near the mother, was gone, but that there was still broken glass too straight and clear to be from alcohol bottles? There has to be a... What was your dream about? Now, Look here, kid, because I'll tell you what mine was about. That damned picture, the one we never saw, and thus shouldn't be able to picture in our dreams. Look, can we just stop? End of conversation. The following account is a series of undated entries by Jeffrey Dunnels after being released from foster care and having set up a successful writing career. The journal was found near the two memorial stones of his parents. A shriveled up, burnt Polaroid no longer able to be identified lay next to it, along with shattered pieces of a frame and the group home's missing butcher knife. It took a while, but I managed to make some time in my busy writing schedule to go back. Camarillo, California had always been a wannabe LA. Small, yet spread out in an attempt to appear large, the city had long been the home of both my greatest dreams and my darkest nightmares. I came back for a few different reasons. One, I guess I explained already. I guess I partly came for the nostalgia. Two was to pay my long overdue respects to my parents' graves. But the third reason, Camarillo, home of my darkest nightmares. Yeah, it was time to change that. The first place I visited when I got there was the group home I'd stayed in while my mind pulled itself out of its madness. I couldn't wait to show Lenny how much I'd matured and the few books I'd already published, along with the manuscript for a new piece of writing, a novella. But when I got there, the place was abandoned. The two houses' vans were rusted and obviously had not been touched, even by vandals, in years. The door to the house was skew on its hinges, and a condemned sign hung crookedly over one gaping hole where a window had been. At first, I questioned how this could have happened. There couldn't really be anything wrong that would cause this. This shouldn't have happened. But then, in the back of my mind, floating like a rotten old apple in a pool of vomit, came a single thought, an image that thousands of dollars worth of psychiatric treatment had apparently not removed. The photo. That damned photo. It was the cause. No, I thought desperately. That was just a psychosis. It doesn't even exist. It can't possibly. But even as I shook my head, I got in my car and drove to the place I knew it would be. Mom and Dad's grave. When I got back out of the BMW, I swayed slightly. The heavy bands, the ones from childhood, had come back with full force. Only this time there was also one around my forehead, like some sort of hellish circlet. Without even needing direction, my feet bumbled and stumbled their way among the tombstones to the memorial stones where my parents were buried, side by side. I looked at the two stones, the ground around them, next to them, everywhere, for the photo, and was pleasantly surprised that, at least for now, I was alone. I put flowers on their graves and got down on my knees in my $100 suit, head bowed and eyes moist. I didn't know then that scars always hurt afterwards, that they ache with remembrance at the pains one felt so long ago. But I did know that just the simple act of honoring my parents hurt me like nothing else. Their lives had been so pointlessly short, and all over a stupid photo. The thump of an object next to me. Slowly, carefully, I turned my head towards the sound. The picture was there, yes, but for once, that was not what attracted my eye. Next to the photo was an open, unmarked grave, and next to the grave was a butcher knife. Jeffrey did not die. The grave's contents were never officially exhumed, but if one had tried, one would find nothing. Just dirt, smooth and undisturbed, as if nobody had ever dug it. Grass even grows over the site, covering up what could have been a tragedy. Nobody knows why Jeffrey didn't kill himself that day. Surely he grappled with the idea. The ground was marked with blurred footsteps, wrestling with the idea in every sense of the word. But once the tracks got near the edge, they stopped. And there, before the wind, earth, and rain washed them away, lay two distinct sets of footprints. They were identical. Even though Part 9 and this final word may never see the light of day, Jeffrey's newest work went viral and was well received by fans and critics alike. How do I know this? Well, I guess you'd say I'm his biggest fan. It took me a while to find my way out of the graveyard, but I managed to do so just in time to see his novella really blossom. I personally am glad he faced his past, if only once. In fact, I think I am going to pay him a visit right now. We have quite a bit in common, him and I. Too bad he doesn't like me. We could be such good friends. Well, at least he's not ignoring me entirely. After all, you can't run from your past. It's hard to know how long I've been drifting, bobbing, ebbing, flowing with the mostly gentle current. The fact that I know anything at all boggles the mind that I should no longer have access to. It feels like an eternity ago, the point at which I wasn't soaking wet. In fact, I'm not totally sure I remember what it was ever like to be dry. Despite the horrible feelings in my gut, the bloating and pressure, I don't feel any real discomfort. Not like before, at least. The worst thing I'm capable of remembering is also my strongest recollection. Everything before it feels like a conjured dream, with details that don't quite add up. Like a puzzle with improperly shaped pieces. I think at some point, I was in love. But maybe that's just the gas. That terrible aforementioned memory is what, I suppose, led to me becoming so wet. I remember thrashing, turning to splashing, screaming, turning to gargling, and a strange, salty taste in my mouth. My feet felt as though they were entombed in concrete, a nemesis to my own body. All that movement, struggling, and action, all for nothing. God, how I wish I could move even just the tiniest bit. I'd absolutely love to turn my head, to be able to take in my surroundings. But honestly, I'd settle for a twitch of my pinky. To paraphrase the Lizard King himself, I was down so goddamn long that everything looked like up to me. I knew, once I woke in this state, which way was up in a literal sense, as it was the opposite of where my body lay. That is until the gas pains, if you can truly call it pain, began. Shifts and changes, twists and turns of the current liberated my shackled feet. I'm not sure how. I couldn't so much as squeak my eyeballs half an inch downwards to see anyway. I felt myself rising, ascending from the darkness to the strange light that tickled my peripherals for what felt like an eternity. Driven upward by my gut, I was certain that I was shedding my mortal coil. And yet, that certainty betrayed me. As I gracelessly bobbed above the surface, I swear I felt a wrenching in my lungs. It seemed as though they hadn't received the memo from the rest of my body yet. Nothing filled my chest but briny fluids. Somehow I found it hard to care. Now, I see the sky. It's all I've seen for an immeasurable span of time. While not terribly exciting, it's so much better than the alternative. A short while after my body emerged from its watery metamorphosis, a particularly cruel tide caused me to flop onto my belly. Limp, like a rag doll, I was powerless to resist. Robbed of the serene blue above me, all I received in return was the haunting depths from which my body escaped. A dark, unforgiving abyss. Sight is all I have, and thus I hungered for stimulation. I've considered how I'll finally end, and what will give me release from this passive prison. But for now, I satisfy my mind with the views. Although, I wish I could see something new, for a change. But lo, my prayers are answered. Something snags my leg briefly, turning me to face the mass I float towards. Land ho! I can almost smell the sweet scents of a forested land on the breeze. Feelings I didn't know I had have begun to wash over me. Tall, lush, and beautiful green foliage looms overhead. It's a testament to nature's artistic virtues, contrasted against the sky. The land under me, presumably sand, crunches and shifts as the tide gently places my body on the shores before receding once more. Perhaps this will be my new home for a while. Plenty of sights to take in. But I can't help but wonder how much longer I'll be stuck in this body. Suddenly, something catches my eye, if only my eye could follow. A shifting, something moving in the nearby shrubbery. All thoughts of release wash away as I hear a squeaky whine. A small dog-like creature, maybe a coyote, appears in front of my sideways bent head. A paw lands squarely on my sternum as more of the beasts come into view. The first one's snout is right in front of my face, blocking my view. All I see is saliva dripping down pointed fangs as I feel a small twitch in my pinky finger. Forgive me for the voice captured on this digital recorder, for my speech is shaky thanks to an anomalous mental illness. I ask you to bear close in mind, though, that I do not know what I saw on that night. To say a mental strain was the cause of what transpired, that final moment, which sent me running out of Castle City and onto the rigid, doomed roads and hills of the valley, is to claim that my experience was wholly illusionary and ignores the solid fact of my ordeal. Nevertheless, the things I saw and heard, and the vivid impression produced on me by those people, I cannot prove even now whether I was right or wrong in my dreadful inference. After all, the chain of incidents establishes no physical evidence of sinister activity on their part. Agents of the Ministry of the Interior in 2010 found nothing amiss in the castle or city, despite the broken chamber doors within the castle, the open study window, and the splash I heard in the Vltava below. It was as though the whole event never occurred, and the castle owners merely sauntered away from their domicile. There was not even a hint of foul play, or that the horrible recording had been in the study, and that they feared the dark city's obscure residents dwelling near the castle. It meant nothing, for dozens are subject to morbid fears time and again. Delirium, moreover, could easily explain their apprehension and acts toward the end. The whole matter started with my acceptance into Charles University. I transferred from Sweden to study abroad in Prague, to further my anthropology studies into a bachelor's degree. Of course, that was one intention. In truth, I chose to transfer in late February for another reason. My younger sister had disappeared over a year ago, just like my mother before her, and the last thing I remembered was her repeating of moonlight embraces. I will vanish in the twilight, which some believe constitutes her suicide. The reason that became a possibility was due to the events before her disappearance. Syria, my sister, was the nicest person I knew, and was even polite to solicitors. But she had little patience when it came to idiocy. When she fell in love, it was with someone who just moved to Sweden. Never seeing him, I barely recalled his name. Nonetheless, they dated for a period, and from her mention was a dream come true, as she talked at length about his soft voice. Around early July, Carria visited him as a surprise for his birthday. When she arrived at his house in Lund and approached his door, she heard odd noises from inside. Peering through the door's mail slot, fretful, she claimed to see her boyfriend receiving intercourse from another guy. She had ended up describing to me her sorrowful distress and the overall confrontation that inevitably ensued. As imagined, their relationship ended. In the end, my sister never cared who he cheated on her with. She only despised the infidelity itself. We never heard from that guy again. It had surprised me how well Syria seemed to be handling it. Yet after a couple weeks, she became reclusive. The times she did talk, it was only to me. She seemed languid and pallid. Her eyes were practically cold and lifeless. February 16th was the last I saw her when she left for work and never returned. That is why I came here, to distract my thoughts from my mother and sister's disappearance by celebrating my step into adulthood, with sightseeing and then visiting my uncle in 5 days. I had a tight budget and no car, and ended up traveling by bus, hitchhiking, or walking. Within Český Krumlov, individuals told me that going by train was the best way to tour and get to Prague. So it was at the train station, after I balked at the required train change, that I learned of the dark city. The sagacious ticket seller, who spoke with clarity, appeared considerate to my situation, unlike the other informants. Since you're low on finances, you could take the bus, he said. It runs through Mireworth. You might have heard about that, although people stay clear of that place. If not, there's a 17-year-old, goes between here, there, and Prague by arranged taxi, it seems. You could ask him for a ride. He doesn't live there, looks official, but he's the only person I know who goes to Mireworth of late. Usually waits near Batavia's gift shop around 8 a.m. That was my first awareness of the dark-cornered Mireworth. An allusion to any place where there is little knowledge would have caught my curiosity, not to mention that the seller's tentative reference to it aroused a certain interest in me. For a city to be repelled, it must have some deep cultural mystery that academics would enjoy discussing. I hoped this person would let me ride along so I could see the foreboding city. After asking the seller more about it, his responses were self-assured and did not falter. About Mireworth, he questioned. Well, it's a towering city close to the Vltava River, built in the 1600s. The castle is large for a place that big. All fell to pieces in the last centuries, though. Its residents either do business here or in Prague. They used to have business trades of their own, but that all left except for the factory that's still operating. The factory was once a big deal, and the eldest Marek who owns it is richer than any of us. Strange man. He stays housebound with his siblings. Some nervous condition. Being children of Nathaniel Marek, who founded the company, they're apparently born from a foreign woman named Lenora. An Arabian or so, I hear. After the death of their parents 40 years ago, Dietrich raised Trenton and Teresa. Occasionally we have seen the 3 siblings, but I never saw the old man or his wife before they died. I guess you're fishing as to why people turn a cheek to Mireworth. To be honest, you shouldn't adhere too much of what others say. Although, you might get something out of the tales old-timers spin about the dark construct east of the castle near the Vltava, Academy of Welton. The story is the mad Nathaniel built it, to acquire the arcane truth, whatever that means. The school is a Baroque Gothic like the town, and most people avoid the place. Well, except the students who attend. In truth, people just don't like Mireworth, but you can't blame them. The people there are very standoffish, even to the nicest of us. You're from Sweden, aren't you? I can tell by your accent. They won't welcome you either since you're from another country. There is a strange kind of presence in those people, so noticing it won't be difficult once you see them. A lot of them have pale skin and cold, vacant eyes that seem to look through you. Because of that, nobody here or in Prague want anything to do with them. There used to be stories of their weird glass art sold by tradesmen. It is possible Nathaniel just got it from foreign business trades, but with his death, the town began turning out fewer amounts of the glass art. You'll see one if you go to the hotel across the way. Just be careful if you go to Mireworth. I can't imagine that place is pleasant at night, but a daytime trip with that Adele fellow shouldn't hurt. On his suggestion, I went to that hotel. After talking my way into a room upstairs, I spent most of the evening there, scanning through their small library and reading about Mireworth, which provided little information. I ended up researching it on my cell phone, but that was fruitless. All I learned from my study was that the Marek glass factory produced and marketed glass items, making it the sole commerce of Mireworth. Despite the rumors, their glass always impressed the country. It grew late. Leaving my attractive room, I went down to the main floor for sustenance. Immediately, the glistening of a bizarre glass object on the corner table, under the fluorescence, caught my attention. Then the owner of the hotel, a Mr. Thomas Field, who dabbles in glass art, explained on how he acquired it, which was to his unease from Mireworth. Once he saw my interest in the beguiling object, the owner was then helpful enough to guide me to the closed-off viewing room. His glass collection was a notable one, yet I currently had my sights set on the extraordinary etched glass portrait on the back wall. Made of pure glass, it took no keenness to beauty to make me gasp at the fantasy. Even now I could describe it from the all-green color. The scene was of a forest with densely clustered trees, human shapes. At least 12 were shrouded in robes and seemed to encircle a stone altar, surrounded by rock edifices akin to the stone circles of England or Scotland. The last bit I could describe was the numerous polyhedron shapes, with their 8 triangular faces, 6 square surfaces, and 12 identical vertices, that appears to defy the gravitational law. The longer I stared, the more it interested me, yet this interest was curiously disquieting. In contrast to its mystery, Mr. Field said he had acquired it from a pawn shop on Main Street before things went south. At once he put it up in the hotel. It was labeled as of late century Germanic origin, but this attribution was wholly tentative. Strangely, when the Mareks learned he had the portrait, they made offers to buy it back. Mr. Field knew the stories, and his feeling toward Mireworth was of disgust at the social degradation, and stated the rumors around here were justified due to the adding of a cult structure, which overwhelmed all other churches there. He said it was called the Griever Church, and was a kind of pagan group imported from the Germanic region a century ago. When Nathaniel built the school, the church was merged with it. All of it seemed plausible to Mr. Field for Mireworth's withdrawal, but to me it was just a desire to see something new. To my academic passion, I could barely rest in my comfortable hotel room, imagining what mysterious culture I would find tomorrow as the night progressed. Just before 8 the following morning, I stood with my backpack on, in front of Batavia's gift shop in the old downtown area, waiting for my ride. Soon, an economy-sized vehicle of yellow color, bearing the logo Krumlov Taxi, rode down the street and drew up to the curb beside me. I felt that this was my ride. A guess made from the person's young face and formal look exiting the cafe next door. The youth approached the driver's side window and conversed with the driver. I was certain the youth must be Adele, though. The ticket seller stated he was not a resident. I could not help but wonder if his pale skin was akin to the kind found in Mireworth. Against my examination, memories of my sister's condition surfaced at seeing the youth's ghost-like complexion. I began feeling anguish for my sister, fearing she would never return. As Adele opened the back door, I knew the leaving time loomed, so I conquered my depression and asked him for a chance to ride along into Mireworth. Leaning on his hip, he looked oddly at me for a few seconds and shot back a curious inquiry. I wanted to tell him so I could observe the strange culture, yet ended up making our conversation brief, proclaiming tourism. Being reminded of the city bus convenience, I knew he was trying to exclude me from coming along. So I reached into my pocket for a compromise, although from his narrow stare he probably thought otherwise. Taking out the little money remaining, I offered to pay my share of the ride there. But what came next was Adele's gentle rejection of my giving hand, followed by a sardonic smirk. "You must be desperate to offer up your little money. How do I know you have little money? The way you carry yourself properly, but have a backpack. You're either a student or traveler. Asking for a ride instead of taking the bus just verified it to me." He invited me to get in the car. It surprised me how accurate his analysis was, so I ended up sitting on the comfortable back seat with him, expecting a decent ride. The car lightly rumbled as it started. At that time, we turned right on the street, flying by immaculate buildings from the 17th century and even older homes. We finally emerged onto a long, repetitive stretch of open country. The day was moderately cold and sunny, but the rolling plains and hills filled with foliage became more miserable looking as we proceeded. From the window, I could see the blue Vltava River. We drew near its bank as our road diverged from the main highway to Prague. The state of the road clearly pointed out to me that traffic was little in these parts. Old telephone poles along the strip carried just 3 wires. Crossing the old bridges, I took a mental note on how the animal sightings grew lesser the further inland we went. Along the desolate road, the question of my endeavor to visit Mireworth came up. Adele's Germanic patois caught me off guard, but I soon gave my concise explanation, which produced an unexpected response from his lean frame. The teen looked at me with studying eyes. It was in that look, underneath the shaggy, ebony hair that waves just at the ears. I noticed a queerness to his eyes. His eyes could only be described heterochromatic, to where his left iris is amber and the right is green. Though the dissimilarity can be a naturally inherited disorder, being eye to eye with them gave me a strange unease. Overall, he understood my curiosity for the deceptive city. He was even parallel to my desire, for as an intern at the Ministry of the Interior, he volunteered to do a report on Mireworth for his political mentor. These long taxi rides did not cost him because his mentor paid the travel expense. He stated, his reason for volunteering was to understand Mireworth's stance in global politics. Listening to that assured me that I was not the only inquisitive soul eager to see the city. Then we reached the summit of the hill and beheld the valley beyond, where the river curves around the valley. On the distant misty horizon, I could just make out a dizzying profile of the panorama below us. My mind then conceived the realization that I had come face to face with the mysterious Mireworth. It was a city of towering leviathans with compressed structures, yet one with an ominous dearth of visible life. Going over the elongated old bridge, the 7 tall steeples were seen, looming black against the Vale's horizon. A few of them were crumbling down from the top. Vast groupings of gambrel roofs and peaked gables displayed with vivid imagery the idea of worm-like decay. There were also some large Baroque houses with a balustrade forming a widow's walk. Getting closer to the school district, the structures worsened. Here I glimpsed a colossal black brick building scarcely rising above the city, yet holding an aspect of hidden malice. I was confident this must be the Academy of Welton. As I looked, a subtle sense of beckoning seemed conjoined to the ghastly repulsion, for I could see a few individuals leave and enter the construct, wearing steel-cubed cages on their head. Underneath that metal, however, I felt a malignant stare overshadowing us from one of them. When I saw the individual twitching in an unwholesome, grotesque manner as he collapsed to the ground, my mind filled with nightmarish horrors, for no one aided the poor man. Barely anyone was on the road, but we presently began to pass apparent empty houses with broken or dust-covered windows. Occasionally, we have seen the pallid-looking people working in back-breaking occupations and children playing around doorsteps. Somehow these people were grimmer than the city, for almost every person had a certain instinctive dislike of us, I imagined. In seconds, I thought of the etched glass portrait I had seen, spelling out some hidden horror. But this semi-memory passed quickly. As the car reached a congested part of the city, Main Street, Adele advised me not to ask questions about Mireworth and do not talk to the ones with cages on. The people here shunned interaction with them for a reason he did not know. Soon we rolled into the large cul-de-sac and drew up on the right side of a moderately sized building with faded dark paint, which proclaimed to be a general store. When we exited the car and our driver left, I was glad to get out and stretch. Adele and I proceeded to purchase a beverage for ourselves in the general store. Inside was an elderly woman with the same physical conditions as the others, so I did not ask her anything about the city, which nagged at me. Remembering what they said about these people, I began doubting my curious mind would get satiated. Just then, as if he could have read my thoughts, Adele whispered cautiously that he and Dietrich Marek have been good friends for some years, so my inquiries would get answers. I stepped back, trying to hide my childlike elation. So, I instead studied the scene outside. The buildings here were in fair condition and included a drugstore, bank, and a few restaurants. Looking westward, I spotted the office of the Mireworth's only major commerce, the Marek Glass Company. On the land opposite the bank of the Vltava, I saw the gray spire, which I assumed to be part of the Marek Glass factory. Then, due to some air of affability in Adele, he offered to show me around. I could not protest it, especially in this labyrinthine city. My traversing would get me lost among the dark walls, a situation I shuddered. Our walk was mundane, so far when it came to the scenery. However, Adele's speech had seemed to keep my attention. He knew the city well, and knew certain areas were prohibited, as he learned in a drastic matter. Lingering without permission around the factory was restricted. A special avoidance to the school/church, for it was strange, deceptive. From the unnerving lectures to its mysterious studies and ceremonies and voices of a bone-chilling lexicon, only a hideous imagination could be inferred from such a place. Crossing the bridge and turning toward the babbling river, we passed close to the Marek glass factory on K Street, which appeared strangely silent. The factory stood on the edge of the river near a passage and an open amalgamation of city streets, abandoned with falling arches and broken walls. Traversing the gulch on the K Street bridge, we hit a region of absolute emptiness, which made me tremble somehow. Some of the houses were decent, but the majority was tightly boarded up by withered planks of wood. The windows seemed so spectral, it took courage to turn westward toward the riverside. On Howell Street, desertion was more evident than K Street. To my awareness, no living thing or sound existed to me, except the rumbling river. This city was growing more discomforting the further we went in. I repeatedly glanced behind us as we traveled over the stony Howell Street bridge, expecting some malice of unknown origin to be lurking. Adele then seized my attention when he said this would take us to the castle. Mireworth Castle courtyard is where the bridge over the Vltava led us. Through the archaic arch, the square was wholly abandoned, which held the decay of earth, as broken stone lay spread around the dreaded greenery. By going a few spaces east, we came to the convex castle bridge. While our steps hit the path, I could not help but eye the ominous, human-like veiled statues that loomed on either side, spaced about 6.5 feet apart. The sight produced a horrid image. The castle was the overall pinnacle of melancholy Mireworth, piercing the sky with darkened steeples and gambrel peaks that overshadowed lower elements while supported by flying buttresses. I do not know how it was, but with the first glimpse of the building, a sense of unendurable misery infiltrated me. Looking upon the scene before me, I had seen damaged walls, vacant eye-like windows, rank hedges and few white trunks of old haunting trees. An iciness of the spirit was present with a forlorn thought that no provoking of imagination could torture this into something sublime. I was stopped, in the imagination that an atmosphere hung over the domain, which had no affinity with heaven. Regardless, I resolved myself to sojourn the 4 days at this castle to learn what I could of the city. We approached the gray spikes overhead, which I took to be the raised gate. Adele was simply led inside to my surprise. The lack of any employed workers created a disquiet for this place. Within the castle interior, we met a man, no older than his late 30s, who silently led us down the vast hall. The vaulted ceiling enveloped the room, creating a feeling of oppression. The room seemed barely illuminated as shadows overtook the degradation and cobweb filth of the red floor and walls. Eventually, we made our way down the crescent staircase and came into the main hall. The grandiose chandelier overhead was illuminated and added little to comfort the atmosphere. In colors of dusk, the walls were aged and carried aspects of discoloration. The long table stretched at the rear of the hall, while 2 equally long tables were perpendicular to each end of it, as white, ragged tarps lay over them, holding dining materials and decorations that lost their brilliance ages ago. Our remaining hosts sat at the back, long table, seated miserably before their food. The man at the middle appeared the oldest, to which I assumed was Dietrich. A young, pretty woman, who sat 2 seats over to the right, was very pale, sitting among the shadows. These were the 3 Marek children, and after my entrance, Adele introduced us. We sat down, and for some instances, while Dietrich was silent, I gazed upon the siblings with part pity and part awe. There must be some logical reason these young adults appear this terrible. All 3 had characteristics that were noteworthy. A corpse-like complexion with eyes liquid and luminous beyond comparison. Their noses were of arabesque model. Their lips were pallid, but had an astonishingly beautiful aspect, and the hair was of web-like tenuity and smoothness. Their silken hair had been untended and wildly displayed itself. Dietrich did not seem to eat and stirred the food with his fork as his siblings sat. After Adele's request to explain their condition to me, Dietrich spoke. His voice was varying from fearful indecision to burst of passion. It was often unhurried and hollow during his excitement. At some length, Dietrich entered into what he understood to be the nature of their affliction. Dietrich said it was a constitutional illness, which he found no cure for, a disorder of the nervous system. They suffered from acuteness of the senses. Sometimes a muscle spasm against the will would occur, and along with a contrast of personalities, I then learned, in broken hints and pauses, of another feature in the disorder. They were in the grips of an influence that called out to them with broken utterances and hideous physical manifestations of demonic witchery. Dietrich admitted timidly that much of the strange despair afflicting them could have natural source, a family illness. "My siblings have the malady worse than me," he said, with such gloom I could never forget it. "And their demise will make me the last of the Marek family." As he spoke, the twins stood almost mechanically and passed through a part of the main hall, ignoring our presence, and disappeared. I felt a sensation of sadness oppress me as my sight followed the twins' retreating steps. Hearing the creaking door shut, I placed my attention back on the man before us. Dietrich informed us that the malady was beyond the knowledge of their physicians and therapists. In my attempt to alleviate his sullen character, I raised the question of Nathaniel Marek to him. His response was in varied tones. "Nathaniel," Dietrich murmured slowly. "Oh, what are people saying? What did you hear?" I had no reason to hide my knowledge, so I told him. When I finished my inquiries concerning Mireworth, I heard him sigh. Our father talked about it practically every night. "So now," I said, "thanks to you, a better understanding of this city can be explained to the outside world, right?" Dietrich gradually raised his hand. "Our father spoke of this city once to the outside, and no relevant result came." Those words discouraged me somewhat, but I did not let it dampen my inquiries. "The story, then," I began. Dietrich did not let me finish. A deluge of passion swept over him to have found an outlet that he seized upon the topic voraciously. My and Adele's back was toward the left spectral window, but Dietrich was facing it. Something had caused his gaze to fall on the ominous, distant steeples of the Academy of Velton. The sight seemed to upset him, for he gave weak curses. The story began there, that cursed place of hellish design, where the hollows start, a gate to hell, and clear drop down to a part of the river. Our father had made it, the man that found secrets in that forest. He told me how Mireworth was in a terrible economic state during the 1900s when his father was alive. No business could flourish, yet Nathaniel Marek strived to keep the glass factory going. He traveled with 2 business partners around Europe to find things to help his factory's production, things that were considered better than the old process in Mireworth. Of course, there was opposition, for some business partners were against the custom of the southwestern Germanic people. There was talk about a place southwest beyond the Czech Republic, where thick forests lied, and deep within its confines were several stone edifices, older than the town near it. Ruins with different carvings had all worn away, and had pictures of the unspeakable polyhedrons, along with ghastly, human-like figures. The ones who lived in the forest had all the minerals and resources they needed, sporting bracelets and armlets made of silver or gold. Also, a kind of glass carved into the ruins was in their possession. Entirely the people that lived there were young, no older than at least 36. Nobody could get the Germanic people to explain where they acquired all of these things, except Nathaniel. No one knew how he did it, but after asking how they gained so much and lived in a forest, the story was finally warmed out of the leader, Rosalind. I found myself trembling at the eerie and the genuine arrogance of his voice now. For after he explained that the Waldbewohner or forest dweller was the name of the southwestern Germanic people in the Black Forest, his father uncovered from them that there are secrets in the world most people never cared to understand. Apparently, as Dietrich explained, it appeared the Waldbewohner knew one, for they sacrificed their young men and women to some witch's coven, the ones from his distant land, that rooted somewhere in the abysses of Europe. By these inhumane acts, they received favors in return. The same figures carved on the old ruins, they spoke to deep within the forest. In the darkened depths beyond the wall of sleep, they had queer constructs and seas of black and green. It seems when this obscure realm manifests in dreams, the landscape would be full of them. That is how the Waldbewohner became aware of the shades and soon concocted a deal. For some reason, the shrouded aberrations wanted human sacrifices. The Waldbewohner accepted this, though, since they had no other choice for survival. There could be an underlying reason, however, for it turned out that a few months after the sacrifices, the victim would then appear in that dream. The sacrifice had, in a way, transcended them into an immortal life among the sea of dreams. So, the living offered an amount of youths to the shades twice a year, the spring equinox and autumnal equinox. In exchange for this, the shrouded figures agreed to supply them with minerals. They manifested the materials through the earth and used alchemy processes to form the minerals. After some time, the arrangement went fine, for the Waldbewohner stopped thinking about the idea of death, except ailments or anything before the sacrifice. They willingly accepted the ritualistic end of being drowned during the reciting of verses from a strange black-leathered book, because they thought what they gave up was worth it in the return. Rosalind then showed Nathaniel the book she used to recite the verses and incantations needed to invoke the shrouded people. Despite the tour of her dwelling, she never revealed one of the shades. All she said was that they prefer the remainder of their knowledge kept secret. Afterward, she gave him the book and showed the page, which she said could summon one of them from any dark corner. The concept was to darken the area and recite the prayer at the odd hours, such as 1, 3, 5 o'clock, and so on. She stated he could find them at any point on the earth. Around 1949, Nathaniel discovered the Waldbewohner all gone, every trace of them wiped away, which made Nathaniel wonder if the nearby village was responsible. Yet when he searched, he found few Waldbewohner were alive. These survivors gave little to no explanation of what occurred. It was as if they feared to discuss the devastation. That hit Nathaniel hard since his production was poorer now, and he hoped to barter more minerals from them, as he did before, after their first meeting. Mireworth was suffering even more now, because the minerals used in the production helped bring in massive revenue, which was distributed to the city too. Nathaniel became desperate and spoke out at the city people, telling them of the Waldbewohner and how they gained prosperity, stating that if a couple able people could help him, he could get a hold of such a resource and provide hefty amounts of minerals. The business partners who accompanied him to the forest backed up his claim, though the general view was skeptical. But since Nathaniel's factory provided the most revenue, His words swayed them. At this point, Dietrich faltered and looked out at the sky, mumbling some unintelligible phrase. The moment I spoke to him, he was silent, so Adele and I waited until he would speak again. So far, his story seemed odd. I never read of documentation on the Waldbewohner people or any group like that living in the Black Forest. As for Adele, I could not tell if he believed it. Most of his expressions have been stoic so far. I was young then, Dietrich suddenly spoke, but I learned what no boy should learn about his home. Bylands, Lazarus, and Balberith. To hear those ominous words howl through the air during the spring and autumnal equinoxes after they entered that horrid construct which signaled the act. Then at the school, in the subterranean basements, he and his business partners dropped victims from the young to the old into the hollows, where a part of the Vltava flows under, and then the bodies vanish from our world. He paused again, and from the sight of his watery green eyes, I suspected something foreboding about to surface. When I addressed the poor man's muttering, he darted a gaze back at me and broke away from his eerie phrases. Dietrich probably saw me sink in my seat, for he began to smirk wretchedly and told the tale. A horror of practices and acts leprous and cancerous with evil dragged from elder worlds. To hint to the school's control of the hollows and distribution of minerals, which the hollows provided after every sacrifice. And the griever box, a cubed steel contraption made to restrain the senses of the self, provoking eldritch knowledge and grotesque marvels only discernible by sensitive eyes, would just invite insanity. They desperately sought communion with the shades to learn the arcane truth, a damnable knowledge those beings held. It was in their avarice when they began discerning the Warden Book, that black-leathered book. They brought upon themselves misery. My hands held onto my seat tightly, despite my sense of logic, as I heard the sinister aspects in his words. When the Academy of Welton let outsiders assist in deciphering the book, they learned some of the insidious scripts betraying the secrecy of the cult. That was when the sightings began. Corrupted structures of reality and darkened things stalking individuals. After that, some of the students and city people had difficulty speaking while others became insomniacs. Some exhibited bizarre, sudden, jerky movements and gradual blindness. Those who were lucky had a personality change. It all led to one terrible night in September. An encroaching mist inundated upon the city from the valley. The dead and dying were thronged along the concrete streets, while shouts and screams haunted the air in Mireworth Square. Sinister ritualistic praises surged through the skies. Dietrich breathed, and then continued with the aftermath of that night. Nathaniel took charge and declared the city must make up for their betrayal. Their father was far gone now, as Dietrich put it, for Nathaniel had said the shades brought them minerals and rich commerce, so they should have what they want. Nothing would change on the outside, but the city would avoid sharing its secrets with outsiders. To reconcile themselves with the shaded devils, they would all take the Coven's oath, signing their names in that eldritch book, and will continually give bodies to the Vltava. Their caution to the monsters prevented any protest. 10 years following, Nathaniel divorced Lenora and married another woman, whom he had a child. The daughter ended up studying abroad in England after Nathaniel remarried his first wife. You probably want to know the real horror, right? Well, it isn't with those shaded devils, or our father's mad determination to salvage a city through horrendous rituals, Dietrich said. No, the real horror is what the ones that afflicted us are doing now. Those homes on Howell and further in on K Street are full of them. Visor they call themselves, but I know they are the ones from his distant land, the men, women, and children. How do I know, you ask? I've seen them, caught a glimpse of what they look like during their nightly procession at the Vltava, on their so-called day of Ostara and Mabon. Oh sure, they look like decent folk, but on moonlit nights amidst those quieted homes, their cauldron where all the varied devils of adolescent to corrupt ages mix their venom and perpetuate their obscene horrors, committing Dionysian carnal intercourse to fuel the progression of their magic, and then sing in hideous praises. No one knows why they're here or what they plan, but I captured part of their witches' Sabbath one night in hopes to. Oh God, I hear it, those inescapable chants. The abruptness and terror of the man almost made me weak. His eyes wide, and he covered his ears while he wore a mask of fear. Those cadaverous claws dug monstrously into his ears as if to tear them off. Adele started at Dietrich's frozen stare and shook him to move him back to reality. The wide-eyed expression he wore gradually faded. Soon his grip lighted and I retreated upon my feet, cautious of the troubled man's next action. Echoing in my ear was the incoming roar and pattern of watery beads upon the streets outside the window. It was then I saw the twins watching the scene from behind the stair banister, and then depart once more. Both siblings eventually retreated through the creaky door again, with melancholy around them. It was around the time our night ended. The twins had succumbed to the enervating power of hypnos. For a few days, I was hostage to the castle due to the raging tempest outside. During that period, the names of the twins went unmentioned by Dietrich, Adele, or myself, for Adele and I became preoccupied in our endeavors to liberate the misery of our host, through a theoretical argument that his experiences are caused more by neurobiological malady than archaic witchcraft. Later in the night, as we all sat in the study, Dietrich revealed his wish to show us the Worden book, but it had disappeared last month. Instead, he chose to play the recording for us from his digital voice recorder, so we may understand his torment. I could sense an increased feeling of aggravation from his frame, for he disclosed his disdain at our skepticism. To capture it for posterity, I secretly set my device to record from my backpack, so this so-called proof could be better studied. This recording, he had said, was obtained around 2 a.m. of September 2008, near the 6th boarded-up house on K Street. Former experience had told him that September Eve, the ghastly Sabbath, would probably be more fruitful than any other date. One of the voices, he mentioned, was eerily soft amongst the other voices. From what I heard would burn a haunting, echoic memory in my mind. Unidentified sounds of a male voice. As the Lord of the Covenant, even to the 4-day child, for from the gulfs of nightfall to the ends of dreams, always praise Lazarus. Forever the gifts to the sons and daughters of the Lord of the Covenant, O Baal Berith. A distorted voice and soft human voice. O Baal Berith, the Lord of the Covenant, who rules the ones from his distant land. Male human speech. So it is said, child two-faced and innocent, descending the ebony steps. Control fragments of nothing, enslaving dreams. Distorted voice and soft human voice. For she who taught us the arcane truth, in an oath of blood we are sacred. In the eyes of her mind, all is naught. Acolyte and companion of the night, who rejoice in the wailing of men, who traverses the shadows of the sepulchres made, whose moonlight feeds terror into mortals. Garm, Nyx, 4-day child, look kindly on our sacrifices. Speech stalled by an abrupt end of the device. It was with a trace of genuine dread and reluctance that, against the unsettling mystery of the words, I was glad the first fragmentary words were in a human voice, a calm, collected speech which seemed Slavic in accent. Having listened to the tantalizingly shaky rendering, I had made out another human voice, though. Lightly feeble was distinctly softer than the first. The last was distorted and portrayed an atmosphere of dread and obscurity. My nerves were trembling a bit, for the gathering of the recording created more misery upon my psyche. As I looked to Adele, it was as if a vice grip of fear mixed with astonishment arrested him. In our unease, Dietrich then tried to awaken his siblings. The mood became more darkened as even I started to think the twins may never awaken. Abruptly, the older sibling had sealed the wooden doors of his sibling's chamber, presuming they would stay there until he arranged for a burial tomorrow. When I heard from Dietrich what led to him boarding up his siblings' rooms, which was in consideration of the deceased to avoid needless inquiries, maiming and desecrating from the medics, I bore no lingering desire to oppose what I now saw as a lesser evil. Adele and I became concerned and obliged to inquire each other on the vagaries of madness, for we would see Dietrich stare into vacancy for long periods, claiming they stole the warden book back and nodded to some imaginary rhythm. It was no wonder his condition made him fearful. It made me fearful. I would occasionally feel the creeping of some anomalous tendril come upon me by slow degrees. This sensation became more apparent after I retired to my bedchamber that night. Sleep did not come upon me as time wore on. Struggling to remove the thoughts that stimulated such nervousness dominated me. I tried to convince myself that this depression came from the despairing room, as the ragged curtains tortured into movement by the howls of an endlessly growing storm. However, this gave no result. I raised myself from the pillows and stared intently into the encumbering darkness. I do not know why I felt the need to do so, but I believed I had to, as if awaiting something. Overcome by an intense horror, I threw on my clothes and resolved myself to escape this wretched condition by moving about the chamber. In the darkness, I moved throughout it, anxious when I heard steps at my door. At that moment, I recognized Dietrich through the now partially open door. His air appalled me, but anything was better than the maddening seclusion of my room. Soon Adele came from his chamber across from mine to uncover the sounds outside his door. After staring for moments in eerie silence, Dietrich asked, "Well, have either you heard it, the songs?" He then faced Adele, who was as worried as me now. "You haven't heard it either? Then you must hear what curses my blood." At once he ran to the window and flung it open to the raging tempest. The indiscriminate ferocity of the entering winds practically raised us off our feet. A whirlwind had apparently gathered its force, for there were violent changes in the course of the wind and the growing breadth of the darkened sky. The stars and moon were obscure, as the shrouding vapor of the silvery mist hung around the castle. In all aspects of the night, I could feel the growing coil of fear constrict me again. Dietrich now became consumed by the maddening chants, which his cognition failed to see as simple, auditory hallucinations. Against the storm winds, I, for a moment, paused. It appeared that, from a distant part of the castle, there came what may have been the echo of a chipping and scratching dull sound. There was no doubt that the motions of the window and the persistent increasing storm made the sound, surely. So I remained with Dietrich and Adele. For that period, Adele and I attempted to calm Dietrich into a passive state. However, I again paused abruptly, now with a sense of trepidation that there was no doubt I did hear a seemingly far-off, prolonged scratching sound. Troubled, while I was upon the occurrence of this second sound, by a boundless, conflicting sensation, I retained a thought to reject, invoking the nervousness of Dietrich. I was not certain whether he or Adele heard the sound too, even though Dietrich's lips trembled as if he were muttering phrases. No sooner had I seen this, I gathered a crashing sound. Unnerved, I started, and saw Dietrich was undisturbed. But now it was evident Adele heard this noise as well, for he looked to me with fear. Dietrich's eyes were entranced before him, as his face possessed a stony outlook, and spoke. "Do I hear it? Yes. I heard it for a long time. Both of them were still alive, sealed in their rooms. I thought my senses were mad, but I knew it was their weakest motions trying to get free. However, we did nothing. Then, as if summoned from the strange utterance, a force of a horror was noticed. The massive antique door flung gradually back upon the frame of the room, and there in the doorway stood two cadaverous beings. Blood upon their midnight robes and signs of a bitter struggle was on every element of their frame. They stood, shaking for a while, then reeled back and forth at the threshold, and in low murmurs lunged upon Dietrich. In bestial violence they took him to the open window. In complete terror, I fled from the chamber, retrieving my backpack. The storm cried and slammed at the castle, but I could not distinguish every sound, for the inhuman vocals from upstairs possessed me with so much terror. I wept at the sound of a massive splash outside. I felt absolute despair, since my confinement left me vulnerable to the working horrors of Mireworth. What awaited me outside I hoped to be a course of escape. But now the haunting memory of what I learned troubled me. Upon reaching the main hall, I escaped and left behind me forever the horror-infested fabric of Mireworth Castle. Before the dreadful night, my companion was not at my side, and I could see the exacerbating mist spread out like a blanket before me. Caution took hold of me, for the details of the night that traumatized poor Dietrich came to mind, and I had now fallen victim to mysticism's design. Are the shades in that mist waiting to claim any unsuspecting soul? Were those two in the castle shades or the twins? Now I weighed my options, to stay at the gate or take my chances in the sinister mist. Before I made my next action, something grasped my left shoulder. Darting my sight back, I met Adele, who, though clearly distressed, looked unharmed. The optimal way for us to escape, he stated, was by the river, to avoid being seen as suspects running from the castle at this ungodly hour. I tentatively gazed at the hellish vapors ahead of us, before we were to plunge into its depths. In its haze, I saw vaporous, clothed beings moving. The sight almost made me refute my first escape choice, for all the feral figures then stood up in a human-like manner and traversed into the mist. I was horrified to see them change from a bestial, ravenous posture to a bipedal, insidious stance, but Adele just seemed to ignore it, as if nothing were there, which annoyed me a bit. At this point, I could not formulate much, so I followed Adele hastily, disregarding my justified caution. I could not tell where we were in the city, but presumed it was Howell Street, according to memory. Thankfully, my guide stood close so I would not lose him, yet the way he seemed to know his course, almost as if the blinding vapor were not an impairment on his perceptive prowess, gave me an inexplicable feeling of disquiet and speculation. How was it he could guide us so well on just memory, with such an encumbering mist and distress of escape upon us? The bridge is where we then stopped. Having directed my attention to the bridge, we hurried over it and followed the Vltava. The partial escape was not all pleasant, for, in the city square, voices ripped through the air, wailing in unimaginable horror as the rainfall mocked their cries in a relentless rhythm. We stayed with the river for a mile or so, trudging waist-high in the murky waters, as two of shrouded monsters passed us, going to the castle. Having cloaked myself under the water's blanket as my heart froze, I slowly looked up until the shaded demons left our vicinity. Further along the shadow of the vengeful storm, we had to get down on hands and knees to pass under a few bridges, avoiding the eastbound turnoff. It was a long and belittling dog trot to the Merrick glass factory. The great walls around us seemed even more terrifying than the castle. At last we saw the factory and made directly for the river's swift currents that started at the far end. Moving on such a surface was difficult, but I did my best and made a good time. For a period, the river kept on along the gorge's walls. At length we reached the long bridge, where it crossed the chasm at a vertigo height. The length of the bridge illuminated in the lightning bolts. I noticed the support was stable for the most part. Our path led us onto the road, and at once veered off into the vale, displaying less of Mireworth's horror. Here in the dense growth, weeds and briars hindered us, and without remorse tore our clothes, ripping them to nearly indecent tatters as we ran from the predicted feral motions behind us. I was in the grips of fear, for I was uncertain if those cruel monsters in that mist had been gradually hunting us. It was morning when I awoke in a hotel bed. Apparently a tradesman named Mr. Bakunin, passing by Mireworth's road, found Adele and me on the roadside asleep. Whether it was an animal or the shrouded devil making bestial motions at our flanks, dear God, I hope I never know. As for the tradesman, with his calming Slavic accent, he knew Adele, so he helped us and paid for our night at a hotel in Prague. Expressing him my gratitude, I could not help but wonder what became of the city that night. I later met Adele while leaving the hotel. He was content to see me well and about, and after our exchange of gratitude, he walked away to give his report on Mireworth in person at the Ministry of the Interior. As imagined, I gave up on my sightseeing. I did, however, increase my stay in Prague by spending time with my relative. My uncle, who was my mother's adopted brother, was very courteous and expressed unusual interest when I told him of my stint in Mireworth. He then informed me about the Marek family, which I already learned about, but most of it was polished over, either because he did not know it or did not want to speak it. His rhetoric continued into something unrelated to the topic, or so I thought. It seemed, as he loquaciously put it, my mother's family had been a matter of curiosity in Sweden. There had been a debate about the marriage of her father, for he was still with the English woman named Elizabeth Wright when he remarried an old wife in secret. At the time of the first wife's re-entry, my mother Patricia was being educated in England. After Patricia's biological mother vanished, the stepmother took it upon herself to take care of her stepdaughter and deposited funds in the London bank to maintain her education. The arabesque woman, now long dead, always knew more than what she told. The baffling thing, though, is why my mother never spoke of her stepmother. Sojourning with my uncle, I spent a couple weeks recovering mentally from my ordeal. In September, I entered Charles University, and from then till December, I was busy with studies in that semester, along with other activities. Then I recalled my past terror, due to occasional visits from government officials who were involved with Adele's campaign, which petitions and evidence provided by both of us had begun. Almost a year after my ordeal in Mireworth, I spent a period with my late mother's family, asking and searching about the mysterious stepmother. The act was irritating for the most part, for I never realized my mother spoke little on her family. which I never quite understood growing up. After finding some old journal writings, I learned Elizabeth Wright was in her 20s when she met a well-established entrepreneur and soon married him. The marriage almost fell apart, yet maintained because of Elizabeth's pregnancy. Growing up for my mother was tumultuous because of the polygamy. Thus, around the age of 17, she moved to England. Months later, Elizabeth's mental disorder surfaced. She became wan and emotionally erratic. This continued for a long time, and it only got worse. Elizabeth's character became unruly before she got placed into the mental hospital and then vanished. Reading more, I uncovered a photo taken of Patricia and her stepmother outside of her duplex. The picture ushered a kind of horror to my ancestry. Finally seeing my mother's stepmother after some years, I noticed a haunting likeness. Her arabesque features and silken hair brought up vivid images of the Marek siblings. Another one showed my mother as a child with Elizabeth, next to a man with green eyes, and behind them was the Marek Glass Company. I choked when I looked to the subtext on the journal page. It showed the names of Nathaniel Marek, Elizabeth Marek, and Patricia Marek. I sat back, dropping the papers on the floor. The fact that my mother was a Marek struck me, for this connection would mean I have Marek blood in me. I had to get out of that house as soon as possible before I regurgitated. From that day on, my life has been a nightmare of brooding and anxiety aimed at the unknown. Do I know how much is revolting truth and how much is madness? Then the wretched idea of Elizabeth's mental illness came to mind. Her malady had described symptoms that bore some similarity with the Marek siblings' affliction, which may have been what Kyria had. I began to question the root of the malady. Was it hereditary? My mother had some mental crisis in my early teens and disappeared like my sister. For a year, I struggled to ward off these reflections, with limited success. In the late autumn, dreams of terrible design started. They were scarce in the beginning, and then amplified in regularity and intensity as the days progressed. Rivers of black and green led to vast watery spaces before me. I seemed to wander through weedy, irregular walls enclosing the monumental hollow canopies and amalgam paths, with polyhedrons as my company. My eyes sighted many nameless, sickly corpses melded with the walls. Then silhouettes began to manifest from unknown gulfs, filling me with unbound terror the instant I awoke. The dream depressed me because they foreshadowed what I would soon find in the bathroom mirror. What I saw stunned me. My pallor had become pale, and my eyes were losing their brightness. The moment I tried to think of a way to remedy this, the sounds of distant voices broke my thoughts. For days I confined myself to bed rest. I did not visit any more doctors because the handful I had never definitively helped. I believed that this must have been how my relatives felt, how Saria felt in her last hours. Days passed, and my dreams became so vivid I could barely distinguish the real from the imagined. I now questioned all that I saw in Mireworth, and wondered if the horrors seen were precursors to this malady. Was the mist there or anything I saw in it? Did Adele see it and pretend it was not real? Those screams, did they come from my auditory cortex? These inquiries led to my restless nights, for I began to consider the following torments conjoined with some diabolic form of antique witchery. My eyes have seen false glimpses of hideous constructs in my reality. On nights I suspected a darkened being stalking me through my dorm building, but when I turn to see it, I find nothing. So far from my knowledge, the malady is progressing fast, for now I hear them call to me in my sleep. Cedric. Now I wondered in the night what my malady will bring forth. Were these visions and hallucinations to get worse? I have no doubt my mind is slowly losing itself to this malady, for as I sit in my moon-bathed room, which comes from the open window, I believe my malady will get worse. I plan on taking this recording, as well as the one I captured from the study, to a therapist in Sweden. I hope he will have the mindset to see beyond my affliction and find the cause. With the recording finished, and as the night wore on, my sensation of dread deepened. Lighted footsteps echoed outside my room, which was common in my dorm house, but my mind started with apprehension at a knock on my door. I languidly went to see who it was, hiding the recording device in my backpack. Staring back at me through the eye hole, as the dark clouds outside blocked the moon's rays, were the same eyes that caused me unaccounted unease. When I opened the door, my sight fell upon Adele in casual attire. After inviting him in, he entered, closing the door behind him. I offered him a seat on my bed while I sat at my desk. We talked about what happened since our last meeting. Then he offered his condolences to my condition. As he rambled on about the future assignment in his home country of Austria after he shipped something to the United States, with patient listening I distinguished a slight disparity to his voice. It no longer had the proper Germanic accent, but instead held a subtle vocal pitch of softness, which slowly grew apparent as he went on in an uncaring manner about the cult's threat of secret continuity that moved elsewhere after the official investigation. That voice surged through me with cold force, for I gathered it had such similarity to that fresh male speech on the recording device. I hoped it was a product of my hallucination, despite what my innermost fears protest, but his gaze never left me. As his eerie sight met mine and my area became lighted in the moonlight, filled with the howling tumult of boisterous chants, slowly masking out all that is in my room, while my sensations grew further from this world. I saw a wry smirk twist on his face, then his lips started to move. Oh God, how could I have missed it? The dark corners of Mireworth blanketed in its morbid and vengeful incantations. Witchcraft, covenant, 4-day child, distant land, and all the time that soft male voice, my poor sister. Wicked mental, lustrous, malignant, and deceptive skill. As everything in my room went beyond tangibility and disintegrated into the gradually filling twilight, he bit the tip of his index finger to draw blood, and then drew an obscure sign in the air. I then heard from his voice the diabolical chant passing his lips. Praise to hell, for she who taught us the arcane truth. In an oath of blood we are sacred. In the eyes of her mind, all is naught. Acolyte and companion of the night, who rejoice in the wailing of men, who traverses the shadows of the sepulchres made, whose moonlight feeds terror into mortals. Garm, Nyx, 4-day child, look kindly on our sacrifices.